As you know, we've been hearing from the Acts of the Apostles a lot in the first reading for daily Mass. We've specifically heard a lot from St. Peter and some great homilies that he gave in the Acts of the Apostles in the first couple chapters. Well, this week, especially yesterday and today, we hear about the life of St. Stephen. St. Stephen is one of the first deacons in the church, so the apostles ordain him by praying over him and laying hands on them, specifically to be of service in the early church. Obviously, we continue to do this today. In fact, just this past weekend, 3 men were ordained in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee as deacons. How did it happen? Well, when one of the bishops, a successor of the apostles, prayed over them and laid hands on them. So St. Stephen is a great servant in the early church. He also, though, is a great preacher. And what we hear in the Acts of the Apostles is that he gives this one great sermon where he recounts all sorts of salvation history in a very powerful way. And he gives this sermon, and those who hear it do not like it very much. There's this one synagogue that becomes, and some people in the synagogue become infuriated when they hear him preach. They accuse him of blasphemy, they bring false accusations against him, and eventually they decide to stone him. Who is overseeing all this? Well, St. Paul. Not St. Paul yet, but rather Saul, before his conversion. Now, what I want to draw out here is just how much St. Stephen emulates Christ in his own passion and death. So like I said, they brought false witnesses against him, and they accused him of blasphemy. Well, during Jesus' trial, they accused him of blasphemy, and they brought false witnesses against him. And then St. Stephen says this beautiful prayer before they stone him, or as they're stoning him. Lord, into your hands I commend my spirit. And then he says, do not hold this against them, right? Those who are actually stoning him, he says that about. What did Jesus say from the cross? Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. And then he said, forgive them, they know not what they are doing. So, St. Stephen offers the most powerful witness possible by giving up his life as a martyr. This is really counterintuitive. You would think that if you really want to do the work of God, if you really want to spread the gospel, the most important thing to do is to save your life, to preserve your life, because then you can continue doing God's work, you can continue preaching. But what does Jesus say? If you try to save your life, you will lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, you will save it, of course, in eternity. What we also find out in the life of the martyrs is that these men and women understood that the work of evangelization, the work of spreading the gospel, is primarily God's work. He simply uses us as his instruments, and sometimes he can use us best by the sacrifice of our lives. That is, when we offer our lives to God in sacrifice, just as Christ offered his life to God the Father, well then God can shower down all sorts of graces and blessings upon those we love, upon the church, and upon the entire world. Martyrdom is something that might seem to be very far off. Some people, maybe very far removed from our own experience, are called to give their blood for Christ. Well, I would say that martyrdom, offering the witness of one's entire life, is essential to the Christian vocation. And I say that because what I mean is that every one of us is called to enter into the Paschal mystery by dying with Christ on a daily basis, and that so that we might rise with him again, and so that God might bless our sacrifice. So the question to ask ourselves every day, and I think this is very important in the spiritual life, to be very clear and specific about asking the question, Lord, what are the crosses that you are allowing me to carry with your Son today? And to ask, Lord, what are the big challenges and obstacles and difficulties in my life today? And then, not to run from them, but rather, like the witnesses that have gone before us, to heroically embrace them in faith, knowing that in so doing, God will bless the sacrifice that we make to him, and he will bring forth from that sacrifice all sorts of graces for ourselves and for the whole world. So today we look to St. Stephen, the great model that he has given us in giving his life to God. We also rely upon his prayers, that we too would be good, faithful witnesses to the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ.